There's going to be those near-term challenges. However, we need to be true to our charge today and focus on 100% zero emission technology and the incentives to accelerate that adoption. For those who wander into near-term challenges, I know it's going to be tough not to. We will parking lot those items for another time. Please understand we have a lot to cover today. We have a lot of content. We have a lot of things to share. This is our opportunity to kick off what is going to be a program through November. And we want to make sure to set that table and get into further meetings where we'll really have an opportunity to dive in to specific topics. There's no question that the benefit of virtual meetings can accommodate a lot of people to attend. But the downside is we're not sitting around the table together, and it limits how many people we can hear the actual voices. So all voices are important, and specifically in this meeting. So we're going to have to use all the tools. We're going to need to use the chat function. We're going to do a couple of fun things. We're going to do a poll at the beginning to have you introduce yourselves. We're going to do some word clouds that get some themes going. And so we're going to use all the tools so that we feel that this meeting is participatory. I'd like to turn to my fellow board members right now and ask them to join in the welcome. And so Davina.
Well, thank you. So I'm delighted that we're all here together discussing how to maximize the Carl Moyer Incentive Program on road today, so we can move forward efficiently, swiftly, and strategically to reach our clean air and climate goals. It's clear to me that each and every one of us has an important role to play in improving the full suite of incentive programs so that they can be harmonized and modernized for today and the future. And in fact, I am very curious as to who's in the room as well as who's not in the room. I'm showing up open to all the stakeholders' point of views. I'll say I do wear two hats in this space. The unique lens is that as a BACMed Bay Area Air Quality Management District representative. So I'm exposed to the reality of implementation with all its successes and challenges. As well as a Carb board member, I've had exposure to the intention and the thinking behind policy creation and state perspective. There have been great changes in the Carl Moyer program, but there are opportunities for further improvement that we should try to work together as we reauthorize this program. And so I am excited to be in this space, and I say we want to have a very honest and open discussion. As Chair Burke said, use the chat function. Please email us when you have thoughts after this so that we can do our best to improve this program for all. I'll pass it over to board member Gideon Krakoff.
Thank you. I want to thank Vice Chair Burke sitting to my left and across the table, Mayor Hurt, for your work on this. Also want to thank the Carb staff who have put so much time into getting this off the ground. So I'm very excited about this work. I come from the South Coast AQMD. We are sitting here today. What a proper place for this in East LA at the confluence of the 60, 710, and 5 freeways. Probably one of the most impacted areas, not to mention the Commerce rail yards from diesel exhaust in California. In the South Coast, we're an extreme non-attainment for ozone, the worst ozone problem in the country. And getting diesel trucks off the road, frankly, is one of the most cost-effective things we can do to address our air quality challenges. I've heard from AQMD staff that getting Moyer money out the door for on-road heavy duty has been difficult. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here today. Our board acted on this in November of last year, and our staff just published updated guidance on Moyer. It was published April 7th. Please look at that. I think that's going to make a big difference. But there's more work to be done, and that's why we're here today. The last thing I'll say, we are home to the ports, the San Pedro ports here in Southern California. We have 20,000 trucks in the drayage registry. Drayage also is in our proposed ACF rule on the front lines for zero emission transition. I want to make sure we have all hands on deck for the drayage sector, all tools at our disposal, and all the relationships necessary to make our ports and the drayage sector a model of how to do things right. And I think that part of the work we're doing today is going to address that. Again, I'm all ears, excited to dig in. This is the first meeting, but not the last. And I'll turn it over to everyone else to get rolling.
Well, that's great. Why don't we go ahead and go to our agenda slide? And while we're doing that, could we bring up the poll, to our first poll? In order to introduce yourselves, what we would really love to know is what group do you associate with? You're going to see a poll in front of you. We're asking, are you part of a small fleet, 10 trucks or less, a medium-sized fleet, 11 to 49 and under 50 million, or a large fleet, over 50 trucks and over 50 million? Are you part of the truck OEM and supply chain? Are you an EJ community representative or just an interested citizen? Or are you part of the NGO and community-based organizations? And so if you wouldn't mind logging in, and then we'll feel that we also have an opportunity to meet with you. And while they're doing that, can we go to slide 1? Look at our agenda. Can we do two things at once?
Yeah, Vice Chair Berg, did you want to go over just some of the orientation of the Zoom really quick so people know the function and how to access the Spanish channel if that's needed today?
Yes, that would be wonderful. And could you do that, please?
Yes, we'll go ahead. We can transition to the other PowerPoint real quick and just get that up so people. Perfect. And with that, I'll go ahead and transfer it over to Femi.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Berg, and thank you, Sandra. And good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to today's IPAG. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, in order to participate in your preferred language, please select the globe icon on the lower right-hand side of your screen if you are using a computer, and select either the English or Spanish option. If using a mobile device like a phone or tablet, please select the More option indicated by the 3 dots, select Language Interpretation, and then select English or Spanish. For those of you new to Zoom, and as a reminder for the rest of us, I'd like to call your attention to a few other features. On the lower left portion of your screen, you will see several options starting with mute. We ask that you please remain muted until the discussion portions of today's meeting and your name is called. To activate the mute unmute option, please select the mute button on your screen or dial *6 on your phone. If you would like to show your video, you can select the video option to turn on your camera. Please note this may increase demands on your internet connection, so you may need to turn it off if you are having bandwidth issues. If you would like to communicate with anyone during the presentation, you can also utilize the chat feature as was mentioned earlier. It's at the bottom of your screen, and you will be prompted with the text box to type your question or comment. If you would like us to call on you during the presentation, please use the raise hand feature or dial #2 on your phone, and we will call on you on the order received. When called, please state your name and affiliation so that we may better address your question. You may also use the Q&A feature throughout the meeting, and we will address your questions in order. Please type your question in, and a staff member will read the question aloud and call on you to ensure that we've answered your question. Lastly, this meeting will be recorded, and we will post the recording on our IPAG website as soon as we can. And with that, I will pass it back over to Sandra.
Perfect. Thank you, Femi. All right, so we have the results in from the poll, Vice Chair Berg.
Thank
you
you
like
so much. What's exciting to see is we do have small fleet representation, about 8% of those on the line, along with about 6% of the large fleet. Truck OEMs and supply chain representatives equal about 13%, and we have about 3% of NGOs, and evidently some categories that people didn't relate to. So thank you so much for doing this, and let's go ahead and move on with our agenda today.
Scroll down. There's more.
To get rid of this, can we take down the poll?
Is it still showing on your end?
We got it. Thank you so much. So we do have a packed agenda today, and I'm just getting rid of one little thing. Thank you so much. We've already done our welcome. We are going to finish that up, jump into presentations by Carb and Capcoa, setting the table and giving us the basis of information that will drive our discussion. We're going to have a group brainstorming, talking about Carl Moyer and transitioning to zero emission trucks. Then we're going to kick off two of the key issues: small fleets and infrastructure, both with accelerating access to environmental justice communities. We will end with some closing comments and next steps within the time frame. Gideon.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to go to 7 p.m. Right?
Oh, yes, thank you. We are going to have a hard stop at 6:55. So make sure we're done by 7 p.m. and it's still the dinner hour. And so we have a timekeeper in our room here. Staff is looking at the time. And so it's going to be fast paced and we're going to be ready to move. So let's go on to our next slide. You know, expectations is so important. Aligned expectations open up possibilities beyond what we think is possible. We have been talking about our expectations and we heard some today. Things like we're going to stay visionary, open to new ideas, respectful to the time to give everybody a chance to participate. We're going to sit with ideas. We don't know the answers today, but we have a lot of smart people on this Zoom call, and we're going to utilize all of the experience. We need to let go of some preconceived notions, let go of what we think we know, and be present. We're talking about the future. This is a full transition of a fuel source for our transportation. Personally, I need to check my tendency to get right to the solution before exploring options. And so really want to encourage. And finally, we need to believe. We need to believe we are the change. And even though change is hard, we are here to get that job done. So I'd like to start off with a story. For those of you that have done in-person presentations with me, in-person meetings, you know I am a storyteller. So our story today starts out with two hikers, great friends. And as you can just picture the morning air, and as they're hiking, it's a beautiful blue sky. There's gorgeous greenery around. And as in hiking uphill, they're kind of looking down, but they're chatting with one another. They're very engrossed in their surroundings. All of a sudden they look up and there's a great big bear and they freeze. But one guy drops his backpack, zips it open, takes out his running shoes, and he's changing his shoes. His friend is absolutely frozen in fear, looks at his friend and says, "What the heck are you doing? You can't outrun that bear." And his friend looks up at him and says, "I just need to outrun you." That is how we feel when there are big changes in front of us. We could get left behind. It feels very daunting. And so the main purpose of this opportunity is to discuss those challenges, to discuss those concerns, and to figure out how inclusively we get those running shoes on all of us. And most important, let's shrink down that great big huge bear to a bear cub that is much more manageable. So with that, we're going to kick off our first presentation. And Sandra, I believe you're going to take it away.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Berg, and welcome again, everyone. My name is Sandra Nguyen. I am the on-road lead staff for the Moyer Program, and I'll be providing today's presentation on the Carl Moyer Incentive Program. Today's presentation will cover a brief introduction of the IPAG, how it came to be, and the overall goals we look to accomplish this year. Next, we'll transition into the role of incentives. Following that, we'll dive into Carb's portfolio of incentive programs, with technology ranging from the pre-commercial stage all the way to the market scale. Next, we'll give an overview of the Carl Moyer Program. Within that, we'll discuss some key changes to date, current incentive amounts for zero-emission technologies, provide an overview of the Voucher Incentive Program, known as VIP, and why now is so important to increase zero-emission deployment for small fleets. At the November board hearing, Carb staff heard a strong interest from several board members in helping further accelerate zero-emission vehicles and the equity work in the on-road Moyer program. In response to that request, this year's Incentive Program Advisory Group was created. The group is intended in discussing all tools that are available to address small fleets, including the Voucher Incentive Program. As Vice Chair Berg mentioned earlier, the board member panel is made up of Vice Chair Sandra Berg and board members Davina Hurt and Gideon Crackle. Incentives play a critical role supporting the state's climate change, air quality, zero-emission vehicle deployment, and petroleum reduction goals. In addition, incentives accelerate the transition of fleets to zero-emission, as well as support equitable, community-driven, clean transportation and multi-sector approaches. Incentives promote economic growth, job training, apprenticeship opportunities, and lastly, it builds on success of previous investments and incorporates lessons learned. The Carl Moyer Program is part of the broader portfolio of funding that Carb administers to improve air quality, enhance community protection, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Each of these programs have their own distinct goal that supports the state's broader strategy. Not every program can fund every worthy technology. Maintaining the integrity of the program's goals is essential to ensure that the state achieves both immediate air quality benefits and that it supports the innovative technologies necessary to meet the state's vision of a zero-emission economy. Outside of CARB, other federal, state, and local agencies have complementary funding sources as well. We coordinate with our sister agencies on these investments regularly. I'd like to call your attention to how these programs are grouped. You can see on the left, LCTI, AQIP, Volkswagen, or the VW Mitigation Trust are implemented by CARB. Whereas on the right side, farmers, Proposition 1B, Moyer, and CAP incentives, CARB sets guidelines for the air districts. However, the programs are implemented at the local level. Starting off on the left, we have the low carbon transportation investment and the Air Quality Improvement Program, which provides mobile source incentives to reduce greenhouse gases, criteria pollutants, and air toxic contaminant emissions through the deployment of advanced technology and clean transportation in the light duty and heavy duty sectors. Next, we have the Volkswagen VW Environmental Mitigation Trust, which provides funding opportunities for specified eligible actions that are focused mostly on scrap and replace projects for the heavy duty sector, including on-road freight trucks, transits, and shuttle buses, school buses, forklifts, port cargo handling equipment, commercial marine vessels, and freight switcher locomotives. Now transitioning to the right side, We have the Farmers Program, which provides funding for agricultural harvesting equipment, heavy-duty trucks, agricultural pump engines, tractors, and other equipments used in the agricultural operations. Next, we have the Proposition 1B program, which provides incentives for freight movement equipment along California trade corridors. Following that, we have the Carl Moyer Program, which is a grant program that funds vehicles and equipments to complement California's regulatory programs by providing incentive funds to obtain earlier extra emission reductions through technology adoption. One of the primary objectives of the program is cost-effective and surplus emission reductions that are funded through the program can be credited towards the state implementation plan, known as the SIP. Lastly, we have Assembly Bill 617, which directed Carb in conjunction with air districts to establish the Community Air Protection or CAP incentives. It provides a community-focused action framework to improve air quality and reduce exposure to criteria air pollutants and toxic air contaminants in the communities most impacted by air pollution. The Carl Moyer Incentive Program is a statewide emission reduction program supporting a variety of project types, including on-road heavy-duty vehicles, locomotives, marine vessels, off-road projects, as well as infrastructure projects. Although the Moyer Program was established more than 24 years ago, the type of projects funded have shifted over time to meet changing local and state air quality objectives. The type of projects funded are also affected by the economy, technology availability, and implementation of regulations. The pie chart shows the percent of funds spent in the different source categories since the inception of the Moyer Program in 1998. I'd like to call your attention to the on-road and infrastructure categories, where we recognize an increase in participation is desperately needed, which we believe the time is right to enhance our popular VIP program, which I'll explain in the coming slides. According to statute, emission reductions must be SIP credible, in which 4 elements must be satisfied. Projects must be surplus, early or extra to any federal or local rule or regulation. They must be permanent. This is satisfied with our scrappage element of the program, quantifiable and enforceable. In addition, projects must be cost effective. As you know, we went to the board in November in support of SB 129 to increase cost effectiveness. The board approved the increase in cost effectiveness from $100,000 per ton to $200,000 per ton for on-road advanced technology, and from $100,000 per ton to $500,000 per ton for zero emission technology. This targeted change to the program was identified as the highest priority among stakeholders to ensure monies appropriated by SB 129 could be spent in the time allotted, and that the program can continue to focus on developing zero emission and advanced technologies like natural gas. One of the unique elements to the Moyer Program's success is the partnership between Carb and local air districts in implementing the program. This structure allows the Moyer Program to support both local priorities and the statewide goals. While Carb is responsible for the overall program guidance and provides oversight, the air districts lead the program at the local level. They conduct local outreach, select projects that serve their community needs, and make sure those projects are performing as intended. There are a variety of zero emission advantages built into the Moyer Program. As of today, light heavy-duty vehicles, which are the Class 4 and 5 trucks, are eligible to receive up to $170,000. Medium heavy-duty vehicles, which are the Class 6 and 7 trucks, are eligible to receive up to $180,000. And heavy-duty vehicles, which are the Class 8 trucks, are eligible to receive up to $410,000. In addition, Senate Bill 513 provided broader opportunity for air districts to fund infrastructure projects through the Moyer Program. This includes commercial battery charging stations and alternative fueling stations for on-road vehicles and equipment. Infrastructure projects are eligible to receive up to 50% of the eligible costs, with an additional 10% totaling 60% for publicly accessible stations. Furthermore, up to an additional 15% totaling 65% for projects including on-site solar or wind generation. Under the CAP incentive program, infrastructure projects serving a port, rail yard, or freight facility are eligible for an additional 10%, as well as projects within disadvantaged communities are also eligible to receive an additional 10% of the total eligible cost. In collaboration with our partners, air districts and stakeholders, over the last 6 months, we implemented a handful of updates to the program to streamline administrative requirements and processes that would better ensure program participation and accountability in the program. Under authority delegated to the executive officer by Resolution 2124-24, Chapter 4 of the Carl Moyer Program Guidelines for the on-road heavy-duty vehicles was published on April 7th of this year and is available now for air districts to begin implementing. To summarize these changes, back in November of last year, the board approved an increase in cost effectiveness, such as from $100,000 to $500,000 per ton for zero emission technology. In addition, maximum funding amounts were also increased for zero emission trucks, with a heavy duty class 8 truck receiving up to $410,000. Next, we updated engine model year eligibility to a 6-year rolling average, allowing, for example, a 2016 baseline engine model year to participate as long as they are in compliance with applicable regulations. This is available for replacement and repower options within Moyer. Next, we increased flexibility for the required minimum annual usage in California. And lastly, we updated a handful of air district, dealership, and dismantling requirements. For more details, the link to Chapter 4 is available in the chat for you guys to see. VIP offers exclusive funding opportunities for small fleets with 10 vehicles or less to transition to cleaner technologies, particularly zero-emission technologies. Understanding that small fleets have less resources than larger fleets, VIP is more of an attractive option because it's streamlined, simple, and speedy. Think of the 3 S's. It complements Moyer On-Road by offering quick and easy application submittal, simple and quick turnaround of voucher funding amounts, reducing the participants' upfront costs, and all forms and voucher amounts are provided annually to the district for streamlined implementation. Participating air districts include mainly Bay Area, San Diego, South Coast, and we see sporadic participation from North Coast, Siskiyou, and San Joaquin Valley, which has just started implementing their VIP program after 10 years. This is partly due to economic needs based on the region and districts' resources to implement the program. Zero emission funding opportunities are eligible in this year's 2022 VIP, offering more competitive voucher amounts for zero emission technology while ensuring emission reductions remain surplus. For example, on average, a heavy duty class 8 truck driving slightly under 50,000 miles per year can receive the maximum voucher amount of $410,000. Initially back in 2009, VIP was designed to support the truck and bus regulation, which is sunsetting. We believe the time is right now to enhance our popular VIP program to support the transition to zero emission technology. This popular funding option already has critical elements calibrated for small fleets. First, there's exposure. Small fleets are currently taking advantage of this option. Second, resources. Districts and participants are familiar with VIP and the different deadlines and expectations. It's simple and easy. And then lastly, location. We are impacting the small fleet in the most impacted area, therefore really setting the program up for success. Through the expansion of zero emission funding amounts into 2022 VIP, we acknowledge the need to enhance support for this technology as the regulations sunset and this technology becomes commercialized, but recognize the need to gather feedback through a public process to help ensure the ease of the VIP process extends to zero emission technology adoption for smaller fleets. So why now do we want to further accelerate zero emission vehicles in the equity work in the On-Road Moyer program? First, we need to recognize the regulatory landscape as we transition from combustion to zero emission. Governor's Executive Order N-79-20 sets a clear goal. All drayage trucks should be zero emission by 2035. All on-road vehicles and equipment should be zero emission by 2035 where feasible. And all other vehicles in the medium and heavy duty fleets should transition to zero emission by 2045. Next, zero emission trucks have advanced from the demonstration stage to commercially available now. There have been significant demand for zero emission trucks as seen in the HVIP program. Furthermore, there are more than 100 commercially available zero emission trucks spanning a wide variety of configuration in every weight class. category. Also, we want to recognize small fleet turnover and that small fleets have limited resources to turn over their fleet more than once over the next few years. These small fleets are commonly in our underserved community and are asking for zero emission now, because zero emission tailpipe emission means cleaner air in our most impacted communities. Finally, we should acknowledge that the state has invested over $1 billion in natural gas technology since 2005. And natural gas now is a widely available and cost-effective option, in part due to its support through incentives and regulatory actions. However, this technology alone is not enough to the state to meet the SIP attainment goals, because new combustion trucks, including those of natural gas, will be on the road for up to 18 years, and combustion trucks suffer from deterioration more than expected, as seen by the 200 vehicle project results. This means that natural gas trucks are pitched as a short-term solution, but does not meet the long-term air quality goals in time for the state. It is clear that we must transition out of fossil fuel and do so quickly. This means moving away from fossil fuel natural gas in all sectors, including transportation. Focusing investments on zero emission trucks today will not only help us reach those targets, but it will also help us achieve economies of scale so that zero emission becomes the cost-effective technology of the future. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tung Lee, the Executive Director of CAPCOA, to share some insight on the Moyer Program. Next slide.
Thank you, Sandra. Hi, Tung Lee here, Executive Director of CAPCOA. So for those of you who don't know, who or what CAPCOA is, just a real quick introduction. It is an association of the 35 air pollution control officers that represent the air districts throughout the state. So I can count amongst my members the Bay Area and the South Coast air districts, as well as the 32 other districts that implement some form of the Moyer program or some form of the incentives program. Next slide, please. Some of the things that CAPCOA does, we provide a service for the air districts to communicate and collaborate on many of the programs that they are responsible for implementing, including the Moyer program and other incentive programs to help get emission reductions. We have 14 committees within CAPCOA that address different issues within air quality management, like engineering and permitting, enforcement issues, planning issues, monitoring. But I think the committee that's most germane to our discussion today is the Grants and Mobile Source Committee. Air district staff make up the Grants and Mobile Source Committee, and it's within that committee that much of the discussion and the coordination takes place with ARB staff to make sure that the Moyer program is implemented in an effective manner and that it continues to get emission reductions and remains relevant as a part of our strategy to move towards attainment. And to make sure that those emissions are accounted for in the state SIP. Next slide, please. So I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit away from what CAPCOA does and maybe talk a little bit about what the air districts do and their responsibility and their role of air quality management within the state of California. So the air districts partner with Carb stakeholders, US EPA, to develop plans, like Sandra had mentioned a little bit earlier, to move towards attainment of health protective air quality standards. Within state law, responsibility for regulating stationary sources lies with the air districts. So stationary sources include things like power plants, landfills, composting operations, things that generally don't move. And so responsibility for mobile sources primarily lies with the California Air Resources Board. And so together, we look at stationary source strategies, we look at mobile source strategies, and we develop those into the plans for California to come into attainment with the federal and state air quality standards. Over the decades of implementation of the federal and state Clean Air Act, stationary sources have had significant emission reductions. We are approximately 90% lower than where we were in the late 60s, early 70s, when there were significant numbers of smog days, there were significant numbers of public health impacts, and there were days that you couldn't see the mountains if you looked outside. And so fast forward to today, and those stationary source programs have been very effective. We've got a lot of emission reductions from them. And according to Carb's data, 70 to 80% of the emissions that we still experience that is in our atmosphere is from mobile sources. And that is a significant challenge. And so we need to reduce mobile source emissions significantly. And programs like the Moyer program help us to do that. The air districts are very interested, and we're very active in implementing the Carl Moyer program simply because we don't have the regulatory authority to limit emissions from mobile sources. But we do, implement the incentive programs because they provide significant emission reductions towards our goals, especially in the South Coast and the San Joaquin Valley, 2 areas of extreme non-attainment in the state of California. And it also provides community health. It provides benefits to local communities by reducing those emissions. There's a lot of attention being paid towards climate programs, and rightfully so, global warming, and a lot of the issues that come along with that, like extreme heat and wildfire risk. But at the same time, we do need to keep in mind that there are criteria pollutant emissions that need to be addressed in both the near, mid, and long term. And the Carl Moyer program is certainly one of the tools that we have in our toolbox to help us address those primary goals. And then lastly, I'll close with the notion that we're all working together on this, and there are a lot of different moving pieces when you develop a plan and you forward that to EPA for them to help us approve and implement. Is that any reductions that we don't get from the mobile source sector, we're going to have to go ahead and turn around and look at the stationary sources again to see if we can get additional reductions from there. And like I mentioned previously, we've already gotten significant gains there. And don't get me wrong, the air districts certainly are not throwing up their hands and saying, well, we're done with stationary sources. They continue to implement their programs. They continue to implement BACT and BART and all the good things that we're doing through the AB 617 program. But certainly with 70 to 80% of the emissions from mobile sources being responsible for what we see in our atmosphere, mobile source emission reductions are going to be a critical part of our strategy moving forward. Okay, with that, I'll move it back to Sandra.
Perfect. Thank you, Tung-Lee. Next slide. All right, and now we will begin our word cloud exercise. There will be a 10-minute break, so feel free to kind of get up and stretch a little bit. And the word cloud exercise will be available during that 10-minute break. I'll just put, let's see, for the record, let's see if we had 10 minutes, that puts us at 4:56. So we'll go ahead. Yes.
Could I do a chair prerogative, and let's go with a 5-minute break since we just got it started, and we could make sure that we stay on time for this part. So have everybody do the word cloud, get up, get something to drink, and let's get back to work.
Perfect. Will do. All righty. So as we heard, we'll go ahead and cut that down to a 5-minute break. And with that, I'll pass it over to Yadir to give some instructions on how to participate in the word cloud. Yadir?
Thank you, Sandra. Hi, I'm Yadir Osornio, Carb staff, and I will walk everyone through the word cloud group exercise. Please go to www.menti.com. For our callers, that's www.m as in Mike, E as in Echo, N as in November, T as in Tango, I as in India.com. And go ahead and enter the passcode that you see above. The code is 94171052. You should be able to see the word cloud question on the presentation as well as your own screen. And the question is, what challenges does the transition to zero emission technology present for small fleets? Again, that's what challenges does the transition to zero emission technology present for small fleets? Let me see, we already have a few entries. And the word cloud will remain open until the break ends. But yeah, I should also mention, there are 5 fields to enter single words or phrases. If you prefer, please go ahead and fill in as few or as many fields as you would like before pressing the submit button. Thank you. And I believe we initiated the break around 4:46, 4:47, so that gives us a few more minutes. So please give your responses as soon as possible.
And then for those that are staying with us and watching the word cloud, when we return from break, we are going to have our first discussion, and we will be taking a few opportunity to chat with a few of you, and also be monitoring the chat function. We're really going to look at clarifying questions on the 2 presentations, and then we will transition into our 2 top priority topics. So we also can bring up challenges that we see. We'll be going over our word cloud and give us an opportunity to kick off some interactive conversations. So if you would like to participate verbally, please raise your hand. And for those of you that enjoy putting the information in the chat, we really appreciate that as well. So we're looking for clarifying questions on the presentation, as well as leading us off into the challenges that we're going to be facing going zero emission. Thanks.
Okay, for those of you returning, if you haven't already, please submit your word cloud responses as soon as possible, as we will be ending the exercise in a minute after the timer stops.
All right, so when the timer stops here, Vice Chair Berg, just for the record here, we will conclude and the break will be over. So that'll be a nice 5-minute stretch, if you will, and we can continue on.
Okay, so voting is now closed. Thank you so much for your participation. Now I'll pass it over to Vice Chair Berg, who will go over the finalized word cloud and continue the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. You know, these word clouds are really telling. I appreciate them because, of course, the larger words are representative of how many people that participated said the same thing. And it always does come up. Infrastructure is a huge concern, followed by cost, range, availability. Then we have feasibility, complexion, cost of equipment, accessibility, all the small words that are around the large themes, if you will, really do build up into those themes, whether it's no vehicles available, power, solar refueling, insurance, upfront costs. These are very complex issues. So this was very, very fun. So let's go to our participants. And are we back from break? I'm sorry, I got a little bit confused. We are back, right?
Yes, we are back from break. We just did a nice little stretch here as you allowed people to put in their answers. So
wonderful. So let's start a conversation, and I'm gonna bring up the participants. I'm gonna ask either Sandra or Femi to help call people who raise their hands. But let's start a conversation. First, clarifying questions. Do you have any questions on the presentation? And if not, how about let's start discussing these challenges, putting these challenges in some context of going zero emission with a bit of a focus on small fleets. But I don't want to limit it to small fleets because we have not put truck one on the road yet for just fully commercialized. We've done a lot of great pilot programs. Our OEMs are excited. They are doing a lot of terrific work. But now we're talking about making it mainstream. What are those challenges going to be? And if we could have some discussion around that. Are we seeing any hands being raised?
yeah, we have quite a few hands. And with that, I will turn it over to Cruz, our Carb staff here, to help with getting those participants to unmuted. Cruz?
Hi, everyone. I have speaker Aravind Kailas. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. From Volvo Group, I'll be unmuting you. You can go ahead and speak.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy Wednesday and good to see so many familiar faces. Sandy, Gideon, thanks for hosting this. And thank you for the opportunity to provide some feedback. So, infrastructure is front and center. And so let's start there. And I think really California has shown the union and the rest of the world how to get started. So kudos to California. I'm referring to AB 1236 and AB 970. One is the streamlining of permitting, and the other one is trimming short the permitting. However, we know that a law is not enforcement. And I think that's where the message needs to go out to the cities, the counties, the different entities that do this permitting. I think there's an opportunity for agencies, and including GoBiz, to get in front of these cities and counties and knowing where the trucks are going to be deployed, knowing how the infrastructure is going to follow. There's an opportunity to be proactive and get our house in order. So that's the first thing. The second thing is something that we don't have, and that is helping our utility friends to support the ZET transition. And we know energization, interconnection, all these are very complicated processes, but if we are to meet these timelines, OEMs and fleets, and we're not talking about one or two sites or 2 trucks at each site, we're talking about hundreds of trucks down the same street. We just need to really get things going. So I know the IOUs and others are looking into these things, but I think I would really, really encourage Carb, GoBiz, PUC, and the Energy Commission to jump in and really steer these types of conversations to harmonize and streamline energization processes. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to voice my concerns.
Thank you.
All right, next in the queue, we have Mark Roast. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. I'll go ahead and then ask you to unmute.
Thank you. So I'm Mark Roost with Sustainable Energy, Inc., and also an advisor to Clean Cities, Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition. And I'd like to propose an approach to battery electric vehicle conversion kits, because most of the fleet is not ready to be replaced. Solar fueling, stationary storage, and the solar fueling should be canopies that cover the, as well as rooftop solar, with enough coverage of the canopies to provide all the electricity generally needed by both the building and the vehicles associated with it. And the canopies can even extend over streets if necessary. They do double duty by reducing the refrigeration load for parked trucks, parked reefers, and even protecting against hail and things like that. And what is the deadline for the 2009 diesel engine model year trucks to repower in the port and drayage and ports and multimodal rail hubs? And will they still be funded?
Staff, are we going to respond to questions, please?
Yes, sorry for the delay. I was trying to find my unmute button. Great question. Thank you for that, Mark, and thank you for your comments. The 07 to 09 vehicle model years will need to come into compliance by the end of the year. So starting in 2023 is when the 2010 or newer vehicles need to be compliant.
How many of them are? How many of them are there in operation today? How many of them are affected by that ruling today?
How many 07 to 09 vehicles?
Yes.
So what we have reported into our truckers database is about 1,200 vehicles, somewhere around.
Okay.
So Mark, I appreciate the line of question, but in also the interest of staying on time, do you have a wrap up thought so we can get some more?
Yes. The wrap up thought is that we are developing both batteries and solar to make all this happen. And we know someone else is developing the conversion kits. We need funding because we're tiny little unfunded startups.
Great, appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, oh, sorry, Mark, if you could lower your hand, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. And then next we have Mikhail Scavarla, and I would like to remind everyone that is going to speak if they could repeat their name and affiliation, just for our records. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mikhail Scavarla here on behalf of the California Hydrogen Coalition. I want to express our appreciation to staff for the workshop tonight, and just to the kind of largest thing, the infrastructure is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. As we've seen in the light duty space, you need to build the infrastructure and the vehicles will come. With regard to hydrogen, I think that requires a vision for, and I believe that the Transportation Commission is working on things with regards to XB 671 implementation, which will probably provide a vision of where to go, but we need to make sure that our infrastructure, which is funded over at the Energy Commission, and the vehicle deployment that's funded by the ARB are kind of in sync. And we haven't really had that experience on the light duty hydrogen side, and we'd like to definitely make sure that it's more in sync here as we start to deploy these heavy duty and medium duty vehicles. I think the scale of the heavy duty and time of use things are things that need to be contemplated and considered. Obviously, we've got to get this in the ground sooner than later, especially with looming compliance obligations with the development of the Advanced Clean Fleets rule and so on and so forth. So just want to put that on the board, and thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take two more, and then we'll be moving on to our top priorities.
Okay. Next we have Matthew Leduc.
You got it.
Okay, great.
It's Leduc. I'm Matt Leduc. I'm the CEO of Forum Mobility. We're focused exclusively on creating an electrified drayage solution for any operator. And I'll just kind of remind folks that there wasn't a lot of distributed solar until a third-party financing option in the power purchase agreement became widely available. And I think one of the big things that, in addition to obviously the infrastructure, I mean, the amount of infrastructure that's going to be needed for just drayage is literally thousands of megawatts of charging capacity and thousands of acres as well of charging capacity. So it's an immense infrastructure problem. But I also will say that, until a finance solution can be brought, if you go look at the HVIP access to date, very few small fleets have access Class 8. I don't know about Carl Moyer, but I know that, the need to purchase a truck to access Carl Moyer is really inaccessible the smaller the fleets get. And I will say that just the smaller the fleets get that we're seeing in data and in practice is the less accessibility that they are going to have to zero emission vehicles. And so when I think when it comes to Carl Moyer, when it comes to HVIP, I will just say that, the ARB and collectively, we got to think about how to attract capital to the space that's going to allow for adoption by any fleet. Because today you see a disproportionate amount of large fleets, which is great, accessing incentives. You don't see a lot of small fleets. They're hard to get. It requires purchases in a lot of cases. And I'll just say that, it's what made renewables widely adopted, and it's going to make what trucking was widely adopted in ZEV. And so I just want, as you all think about changing these programs and incentives, think about the ability for them to interact with third-party capital. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is Board Member Krakow. Thank you, Mr. Waduk, for those comments. And I also know that the leasing issue came up in the Penske letter that was put in the chat, the PDF earlier on today. If staff can comment briefly, I know that our innovative clean fleets segment of HVIP now appears to have opened up a little bit for the leasing concept. I could be wrong, and part of what I'm doing here, at least today, board members, is to learn. But Mr. Waduk, my understanding is that HVIP has dipped its toe through that innovative clean fleets piece into leasing. Is that your understanding? And also if staff can explain if HVIP is starting to examine that?
I could certainly answer. I mean, we've provided comments in a fleet. We think it's an awesome program. I mean, you're at the $25 to $50 million of initial funding. And what's great about Innovative Fleet is that you don't need to identify the fleet. You can grab these vouchers and then go get the fleet in a set amount of time. Whereas the standard HVIP, you have to have a fleet determined at the time. That simple change is going to make it very, immensely more accessible to small fleets under what we propose be part of Innovative Fleet. I think CalStart and the team that's been working with you all on that has done a great job. So I think that Innovative Fleet is the first step. $25 to $50 million is an incredibly great first step. The amount of money that's going to be needed for the small fleets is going to be a lot more than 25 or 50 million, especially when you're looking at the thousands and thousands of trucks that in 1 year will no longer be able to access the ports today. You can just do the math at $150,000 a coupon that times thousands and thousands at 25 to 50 million. Like I said, it's a great start. It's going to need to be greatly expanded to be able to address that segment of customers.
That seems like a very good segue to jump into our next topic. And so I will ask Board Member Hurt if she would introduce the infrastructure and along with our environmental justice.
Absolutely, yes. So understanding the universe around these incentive programs with a critical eye that takes into consideration just the evolving technologies and the data and the incentive landscape is really essential, but it also is essential to have an environmental justice lens to bring everyone along in this transition. So we have as just an umbrella consideration is how to ensure appropriately that environmental justice is incorporated into all aspects of the Carl Moyer on-road program consistently, effectively, and with and it being predictable. We have identified, just to that same vein that Vice Chair Burke stated about setting the table, we have identified a focus on infrastructure and small fleets. And how do we integrate environmental justice is a key question for all of us. And we'd love for you all to place your thoughts in the chat. And actually, there are many questions around infrastructure. How is there more effective partnering, fleet adoption with infrastructure deployment? Another key takeaway is how do we better define how to provide metrics for environmental justice in the VIP program? How should we be inclusive to make sure these communities have an opportunity? And how should we define that? And so, as we said at the start, we have a lot of questions, but we also want to hear from you so that we can figure out the best solutions moving forward. I'd be remiss not to point out that community has concerns with infrastructure projects that are before us right now, even some of which are being blocked in some communities because they don't want added traffic, a concern that we need to work through. And we need to talk about how does this benefit the community? Demonstrate how infrastructure can benefit the community at a personal level with charging stations that are multi-sector so that it serves the community, like providing charger for residents. And we heard earlier about hydrogen stations providing similar support. We also need to talk about reliability and resilience of the neighborhood and the utility upgrades that will happen with proper infrastructure deployment. And so please put in the chat some of your thoughts around how do we join together community, environmental justice concerns, and that of business, whether it's small fleets or large fleets. What are the step stools for small fleets supporting and extending their incentive programs? There is, for many, the Moyer VIP incentive program that has a first come, first served funding option exclusively for small fleets, 10 or less, so that they're not competing with larger fleets. But is this enough consideration? We'd like to hear whether that's the case. Equity, when we talk about equity, the VIP selection process is environmental justice communities being served. Are the lower income folks in these highly impacted communities being served? Do we have the definition and the metrics necessary to ensure that we're bringing everyone along? Next slide. The path forward really requires us figuring out how to also uplift and integrate the voices of environmental justice in the decision-making process of regulations, access, and implementation at the start. I am really privy for the need to have environmental justice organizations a part of this conversation. And in fact, I see some folks in the room today. So please uplift your voice around what does it mean for the definitions that we have? How do we operationalize environmental justice? What metrics should we put forth when we talk about outreach, education, small fleets, and infrastructure creation? How is this aspect being spoken about? And is there anything that we are missing? I think it's important to embrace and really seek the solutions around finding that right balance so that we can keep moving forward. VIP currently does not have an EJ requirement, and there are independent approaches per the different air districts. From my vantage point, I mean, there appears to be more than just environmental justice criteria that we should evaluate when operationalizing EJ. Is it the application process? Please tell us how onerous or not that's been. We'd like to hear what folks' thoughts are around a centralized supportive service for applicants, whether it's state-based. You know, does something like a hotline make sense? I know I spoke with some of our staff, and there are small fleet owners that are looking for consultants. Is there a way that we can step in that role? And there are also a lot of thoughts around grant reporting and compliance verifications and the timing thereof. Next slide. What you see before you now is how districts are currently defining environmental justice boundaries. The VIP currently does, as I said earlier, doesn't have a requirement. So what should we be considering in their project selections? And is it such where these independent but differing approaches with environmental justice communities, is that sufficient? Listed here are two great examples of EJ boundaries from Sacramento, Metro AQMD, and Bay Area AQMD that defines the EJ boundaries in accordance with health and safety code definitions. They're basically looking at communities with the most significant exposure to air contaminants or localized air contaminants. Is this the proper metric and definition that we should be moving forward as we refine Carl Moyer? That to us, as I said earlier, infrastructure and small fleets and making sure that environmental justice is at the forefront is a key part of moving forward and bringing everybody along. And so I will now hand this over to Annalisa Bevan, our infrastructure lead. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. So as we've been hearing, as the word cloud demonstrated to us, infrastructure is absolutely at the forefront and integrally linked into these transitions from conventional fuels to zero emission. And there are many considerations associated with that decision. As board member Hurt mentioned, we've been hearing from fleets their interest in getting help on this because of the very significant number of decisions that need to be made around which technology to adopt, electricity or hydrogen. What are the considerations around the infrastructure that come with that decision? Is it on-site that you're installing that infrastructure, or is it, are you going to rely on public stations or contracted depots that serve multiple fleets but are off-site of your property? So many questions around infrastructure and a number of programs that we've mentioned over and over throughout our presentations this evening, such as the Energy Commission's infrastructure grant programs, which Elizabeth John will discuss a little later in this presentation, as well as utility infrastructure investments that are taking place throughout the state, and climate investments, transportation agency programs, including the very significant federal infrastructure investments that are coming to California in the coming years, thanks to the infrastructure bill that was passed in 2021. Lots of activity at local air districts and with port programs. And as mentioned, the VW Electrify America's of investments with the latest round of their infrastructure investment commitments. They included heavy duty, medium duty infrastructure as part of their commitment for this current cycle. And we expect that will probably carry on. So a lot of opportunities, a lot of questions. Next slide, please. That's why I was confused. I probably should have introduced myself first. I'm the Zero Emission Infrastructure Specialist for Carb. I coordinate with Carb's zero emission vehicle and equipment regulation programs throughout the agency to make sure that we're internally consistent and sharing information and opportunities, and then also coordinating with our partner state, local, and federal agencies. Carb is not typically the lead agency when it comes to activities that support infrastructure, but we're most likely the agency that our stakeholders come to first because we're the ones who are telling them to start considering or actually requiring the purchase of zero emission vehicles. So the place they may start is with Carb. And we have that relationship with fleets, with drivers, because of our regulations, and we want to be able to direct and help and answer questions about infrastructure to make sure that we're we're implementing this as a system, both fuels and vehicles. And we'll hear too from, as I mentioned, Elizabeth John with the California Energy Commission. They implement two really important aspects of the infrastructure activities within the state. First being planning and analysis, really analyzing, deep diving and modeling how many and where stations we need, both electricity and hydrogen, and then also administering a number of infrastructure grant programs that support zero emission fuels. Next slide. As part of working through the Advanced Clean Fleets regulatory development process, we heard from a number of stakeholders in our workshops that they had concerns about infrastructure. To address that, or to get that conversation more fully developed, we held a series of 5 work group meetings that covered a plethora of topics, including hydrogen, electricity, grid considerations, funding, and business considerations. Throughout that, we heard a number of things bubble to the top in terms of concerns and instructions or messages to the state. Specifically, both hydrogen and electricity will be needed. There are fleets that are making a commitment to one or the other. There are also fleets that say they're going to do both. Their fleets are big and there's enough variety within their use cases, their operational needs, that they need both. We also have had a focus on making sure that access to infrastructure is equitable and that there's a public fueling network. It is not the assumption that everybody is going to be able to provide fueling on site where they park, that both fleets that can't do that because they don't have the space or the operational ability to put infrastructure on site, and also fleets who can do that, but because of where their vehicles operate, they'll need public fueling. We heard loud and clear that public fueling network is going to be critical. And fundamentally, this is going to be a large scale and rapid deployment that's necessary in order to match the market growth of the vehicles, both because of interest of fleets and because of our regulatory drive. And next slide. Coupled with those considerations that fleets are asking for, we also need to be looking at the considerations for communities that will be hosting these fleets and their needed infrastructure. This could cause changes in fleet traffic patterns that have impacts on communities. There may be need for site upgrades and the concern that's been raised around site control for those fleets that don't own the sites where they're operating. There may be opportunities for multimodal fueling that serves a community at the personal level for personal drivers. And we also anticipate the need for utility upgrades in some communities, and this may have positive benefits overall. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, whatever we do, none of this can result in an increase in emissions. That's absolutely critical. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth John, who heads the Medium and Heavy Duty Zero Emission Technologies Office, to talk about the programs at CEC. Elizabeth?
As Annalisa said, my name is Elizabeth John, and I am the manager of the Medium and Heavy Duty Zero Emission Technologies Office with the California Energy Commission. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I am going to present on the CEC's incentive funding for zero emission vehicle infrastructure and how CEC funding will be used to complement Carb's zero emission vehicle incentive funding. Next slide, please. So we've talked a little bit about ZEV goals this evening, but for a little context setting, Executive Order B 1612 set a target of 1.5 million zero emission vehicles on the road by 2025 and tasked various state agencies with specific actions needed to support this goal. Subsequently, in January 2018, Executive Order B 4818 set an expanded target of 5 million ZEVs on the road by 2030, as well as a network of 200 hydrogen fueling stations and 250,000 electric vehicle charging stations, including 10,000 DC fast chargers installed or constructed by 2025. And then most recently, Executive Order N7920 requires 100% of in-state sales of passenger cars and trucks being ZEVs by 2035, 100% of operating medium and heavy duty vehicles being ZEVs by 2045 where feasible, and 100% of drayage trucks and off-road vehicles and equipment being ZEVs by 2035. Next slide, please. As the state lead for ZEV infrastructure, the California Energy Commission administers the Clean Transportation Program, which was established by California Assembly Bill 118 in 2007. The program is funded through a small surcharge on California vehicle registrations and provides up to $100 million per year for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions within the transportation sector. California Assembly Bill 8 extended the program to January 1st, 2024. Next slide, please. Now in the 13th year, the Clean Transportation Program has provided over $1 billion to alternative fuel and vehicle technology projects in communities that immediately accrue health, environmental, and economic benefits from these investments. This chart captures the total amount of funding previously expended across the various fuel types. Next slide, please. Additionally, on July 12th, 2021, Governor Newsom strengthened California's commitment to a clean energy future by approving the 2021-22 budget, which includes a 3-year, $3.9 billion budget for ZEV-related investments by Carb, the Governor's Office of Business Economic Development, or GOBIZ, and the CEC. The budget prioritizes diesel emission reduction by earmarking funding to replace 1,125 drayage trucks, 1,000 school buses, and 1,000 transit buses with zero-emission alternatives and fueling infrastructure. Of that package amount, the CEC will administer $1.165 billion towards infrastructure deployment to accelerate charging and hydrogen fueling station deployment and grants to promote in-state ZEV and ZEV-related manufacturing. The investments will help the markets for ZEVs and infrastructure grow to scale, and more importantly, serve as a foundation for an equitable and sustainable economic recovery by drawing private investment to California and creating jobs in manufacturing, construction, and engineering. As the state lead for ZEV infrastructure, the CEC is very closely coordinating with Carb, which is the state lead for zero-emission vehicles. Our agencies are collaborating on multiple grant programs to provide seamless experience for grantees wishing to invest in both ZEVs and infrastructure. Next slide, please. This slide shows how we are proposing to translate the aforementioned funding priorities into real funding allocations over the next 2.5 fiscal years. You can see the total funding for medium and heavy duty ZEV infrastructure in recognition of the need to swiftly transition these vehicles towards zero emission technologies in the most sensitive regions of the state. Next slide, please. So in the past year, we have announced funding awards for over $100 million in medium and heavy duty funding. This included funding for zero emission transit fleet infrastructure deployment, blueprint planning grants for MDHD ZEV infrastructure, grants for innovative charging solutions, hydrogen fuel cell demonstrations in rail and marine applications at ports, a zero emission drayage truck and infrastructure pilot projects, which was in partnership with Carb, and lastly, an up to $276 million block grant incentive project, which I will speak about in greater detail in the next slide. So next slide, please. The CEC has started a block grant project for MDHD ZEV infrastructure called Energize Commercial Vehicles. Energize is implemented by CalSTART and provides financial incentives to increase the deployment of commercial zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicle infrastructure. Currently, Energize has up to $276 million in funding. CalSTART began the process of developing Energize through an intensive stakeholder engagement process to put forth a structure that served the primary goals of accelerating market demand for MDHD zero-emission vehicles, maximizing the number of MDHD ZEVs that could be refueled or recharged to address the sense of urgency, and most importantly, engaging communities so that they are not left behind during this transition. Energize has a strong commitment, especially to the last objective, and Energize will require at least 60% of incentive funds be awarded to projects located in disadvantaged or low-income communities. Next slide, please. Currently, Energize has proposed 4 funding lanes, which will be available at least once a year. These lanes include the EV Fast Track lane, which is intended for those applicants who have participated in state and federal incentive programs, such as HVIP, and need greatest velocities to support those vehicles with infrastructure. This lane was launched on March 23rd and was designed as first come, first serve. Next is the EV Jumpstart Lane that is catered to frontline, disadvantaged, tribal, and low-income communities who may require greater support and additional time to prepare applications for funding. Small fleets may apply under this funding lane and receive additional support from CalSTART. This lane will not be first come, first serve, but rather a competitive scoring process. The EV public charging station lane is suited to address the need of many vocations through public charging locations and may also be a good fit for small fleets. This lane will also have a competitive scoring process. And the hydrogen lane is aimed at providing a clear pathway to our hydrogen vehicles future through a dedicated lane of funding for fuel cell vehicle refueling stations. So for a full list of what type of equipment is eligible for reimbursement under Energize, I would direct you to refer to the project's implementation manual, which is available on the Energize website. And I've included the link, which is www.energize.org. That's 2 I's. Over the next year, CalSTART will work with the CEC to develop strategies for future funding, including specific carve-out lanes for school bus, transit bus, and drayage truck zero-emission infrastructure. The drayage lane may be of particular interest to this group, so we will ensure that you're all engaged in the stakeholder process to inform funding for this lane. In addition, we'll be closely working with Carb staff over the next several months in order to coordinate future Energize funds with HVIP and the Carl Moyer Program. Next slide, please. Additionally, we are currently in the planning phase for upcoming funding and are gathering stakeholder feedback for additional solicitations. On February 28th, a workshop was held to discuss funding allocations for future MDHD ZEV infrastructure applications. Multiple concepts were discussed, and I've provided a list here. I've also included a link in the slides to the presentations given at the workshop. Next slide, please. And this is information on how to submit comments to provide input and ideas to our team. So we would love your feedback and are very open to receiving comments and speaking with you directly. Next slide, please. Then if this is of interest, the Zero Emission Vehicle Dashboard was launched by the CEC's Energy Assessments Division, and it contains data and information about EV chargers and hydrogen refueling infrastructure statewide. For example, the screenshot of the site on this slide contains the number of EV chargers. 79,023 chargers have been installed, with 45% being public chargers. And so this dashboard is interactive, and you can search for locations by county, metropolitan statistical area, or zip code. The vehicle counts come from DMV data, while the infrastructure data comes from a mix of the US DOE's Alternative Fuels Data Center and quarterly surveys conducted by the CEC. And I've also provided a link on this slide. Next slide, please. And then lastly, a resource I'd like to share is Empower Innovation. Empower Innovation is an initiative of the CEC in partnership with leading California technology accelerators, fellowship programs, nonprofits, and private partners. It is a free online networking platform designed specifically for the clean tech community. It provides an opportunity for individuals and organizations to connect for possible partnering opportunities. And there is a link on this slide where you can search the directory of available funding opportunities also. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation. On this slide, I'm also including a link to a Clean Transportation Program 101, Funding 101 workshop, which some of my colleagues at the CEC recently put on. This will be a good resource for how to locate funding and what to expect from a funding solicitation. And then I'm providing my contact information. I'm always happy to speak to fleets about the funding process or about your individual projects. So thank you very much. And I will hand it back to Annalisa.
Hope you're on mute, Annalisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think we're now at a point where we're going to do some conversation. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
So we have an opportunity now to take some feedback and questions from our participants.
Hi, Annalisa, this is Cruz. I have 2 questions in the chat. While the presentation was being provided, first from Bill Booty, did the sales tax exemption pass for zero emission vehicles?
I think that's still active. I haven't heard that that's passed.
Bill, did that answer your question? You may unmute yourself.
Yes, it did. We heard that it was going through, but that's a real obstacle for zero emission trucks on a $400,000 truck. That's $40,000. So it's diluting the grant amount. So we're trying to bring the price down, and it defeats the purpose. So we're waiting for that.
Okay. All right. And the other question we have, Annalisa, is from Monty Worthington. When is wave 2 of Energize planned to be opened?
Yes, Elizabeth.
I don't have an exact date for lane 2, but we expect it Q2, and we will give definitely enough time for people to know when it's going to open and how to apply. And so you'll have a lot of notice before it opens.
Did you say Q2?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Monty Worthington, did that answer your question? If you're able to unmute or chat, yes. Okay, great. And I see a hand up in our participants list for Aravind Kailath for Volvo Group.
Hey, thanks again. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Elizabeth and Annalisa, thanks for your presentation again. And my question really is, what is CEC and Carb doing in terms of making sure that from a macro system perspective, there will be power to support the timelines of ACT and Advanced Clean Fleets rule? I started making a remark earlier that if we are to meet these timelines, then we're going to be looking at bringing massive amounts of power, not just at one site, but at several sites along the same street, city, et cetera, et cetera. I know there's different types of forecasting tools and timelines. So I would appreciate to learn a little bit more about the steps you guys are taking in terms of recalibrating your forecasting and aligning with PUC and potentially even CAISO to make sure that our macro infrastructure is ready to support the load that we can expect. Thank you.
Thanks. Elizabeth, do you want to tackle that?
Sure. So I will say say that the three agencies you mentioned, CEC, CPUC, Carb, we're all working closely together to address these barriers. And we recognize that the goal of electrifying vehicles will need to be accompanied by a focused effort to examine and account for the impacts of those vehicles on the grid. So we are examining grid impacts, which may result from clustered MDHD loads. Annalisa did mention that the CEC does work on some planning efforts. And so we do have a model called Heavy Load, which will analyze truck travel patterns, load curve scenarios, charging demand to inform where loads could exist and behave through time. And then in tandem, there's a tool, the EVSE deployment and grid evaluation tool, which seeks to integrate those results with utility grid capacity data to inform users about how those load curves could impact certain regions. And so we're doing this as part of our AB 2127 effort that was released, but I think maybe last year, but we're working to expand that to include MDHD vehicles in future assessments. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. And the only thing, thank you for getting into great details here. My only polite request would be to look at all this analysis and plug in the numbers that we anticipate with ACT and ACF going full steam starting 2025. ACT 2024 and ACF, I think 2025, and looking at hot pockets, I think that would be a good thing to do to just make sure that some of the early adopters, Inland Empire, maybe the port communities, they will have the power that they need and get the infrastructure on time. Again, we are able to put the trucks, but then the trucks are having to sit and wait for the infrastructure to be powered on, and neither the OEM nor the fleet can control that process. So we really could use your help here.
Yeah, we're working with CEC and CPUC and CAISO to, as well as the transportation agencies, to provide them with any information that we have about where fleets are and the expected implementation schedule that fleets have for implementing zero emission trucks. And we've also been talking, I think this has come up in our work group meetings, you might remember, a discussion of a reporting platform that fleets could use to let utilities know that they are planning to transition to zero emission and what their infrastructure needs are. This might be something which is useful not only to utilities, but to infrastructure providers themselves, and would help accelerate that communication and planning process.
Thanks, Annalisa.
I see we have 2 hands left, and we do need to move into the small fleet. So if we could quickly handle Mark, can you be quick, please?
Yes, Mark, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, okay, I'm off mute now. Mark Roost, Sustainable Energy Inc. Yes, okay, just got scrambled by that. Okay, what about extra? Okay, there's some projects that people want to do for both on the parking on the ports with the solar with them and parking under freeways. And I guess we really need to talk in more detail at length offline.
I think that'd be really wise, Mark. I really appreciate you willing to do that. And so we'll make a note of that. All right, staff. And so can we move to Aaron? Nice to hear from you.
Hi, Aaron from South Coast. Just real quick, really appreciate the presentation on Energize. And there was mention to match the chargers with Energize under the zero emission trucks with Moyer. I was wondering if there's a timing on that, because I think that'd be a great program.
Don't have timing, but I really appreciate participating in this work group this evening so that I can relay this information back to our CalSTART team so that we could start coordinating closely and quickly on an effort to pair those two together.
Okay, thank you. Tim O'Neill from PG&E.
Yeah, I was just going to help address the previous question as far as the capacity on the grid. And I was going to try to explain. I know you guys are in a hurry, so it would take some time to go through it.
Just too much in a hurry on this. This is going to be really important, Tim. So I appreciate you being succinct, but this is good information.
Sure, and I'll do this quickly, but understand that the grid we have circuits all throughout the area, and we have teams that are working, capacity review teams that are working on those individual lines, trying to make sure that we do have enough available capacity to whatever projects are coming on. It doesn't matter if it's a large warehouse, package delivery service that wants a megawatt here, or a company or a customer. I'm dealing with one right now that wants to put in charging stations for 10 Class 8 trucks, which they got HVIP grants on. So big stuff, good stuff there. So we have these competing demands that are coming on to PG&E. So we are constantly going to these capacity review teams and asking them, do we have enough capacity on this specific line? And so it's not as easy as saying, oh, let's just, can we get a few megawatts over there or over there? It takes time. And so we are constantly going through and trying to add on large capacity projects. And unfortunately, when you do a capacity, a reconductoring project that goes all the way back to a substation, that's multi-million dollars, and it's usually a couple of years that does this. So unfortunately, we don't know every one of these customers that are going to start doing this. We're taking them on as we are. The EV fleet program right now has a little over 100 large projects inside of it that's been coming up over the last 2 years. So it just takes us time to know where they're coming up and what that circuit looks like, how much capacity, when can we do an upgrade, how long is this going to happen. We just don't know where we need to do the capacity planning or the upgrades until customers tell us they want to start doing that. And so we're doing our best, but yeah, it's just a constant struggle trying to determine where that needs to go.
We'll really appreciate that perspective, and we'll be working close together, that's for sure. Our last speaker in this area is Beverly Deschaux.
Hi, Beverly Deschaux, Electric Vehicle Association, Central Coast Chapter. Well, okay. I have two areas, but let me just speak to the load. And sorry, I'm trying to pare it down in my mind. The school buses and electric vehicles, the passenger vehicles, are sitting most of the time, and they have the school buses in particular have large batteries that can be used when bidirectional is accepted. The school buses that we have in our county, Santa Cruz, have bidirectional capacity. I assume they all do. And so when that is allowable by the various organizations who are currently keeping it from happening, that will be a tremendous resource for the grid. And and managing charging, incentives for managing charging when we have extra solar during the day. The solar on the grid is being dumped or sent out of California because there's too much for the grid to handle. So if it's incentivized for people to be charging during the day, I don't know what happens with drayage. Like, are they able to charge during the day? Anyway, that's something to consider, is that most of passenger vehicles are sitting about 95% of the time, and with increasing size of batteries, because people want the distances for the few times that they use the distances. So having the distributed energy resource management and controlling, and there's a name for it which I forget, about asking a vehicle which has bidirectional capacity communication with the grid, can say,
vehicle
okay,
to grid.
Well, I know it's vehicle to grid, yes, but there's a name to call when you're asking them to slow down their charging or to not be charging, or to actually, yes, take energy from the batteries. There are already computer programs that can aggregate the electric vehicles and be available for the grid.
Demand response.
Demand response.
Yes, yes, thank you. And so there are those things. I wanted to say something also about hydrogen, but I know you want to move on, and maybe there'll be an opportunity after the next part to say something about hydrogen, which is.
I appreciate that, Beverly, because we do need to move on. And Matt, I do see your hand raised, but we can save it for the next chat.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, and Board Member Krakow.
Yes, I know we have Dr. Katzenstein here from the South Coast, and he spoke a few minutes ago. Just to put into perspective, what we're hearing, we've got, the big issue here, which is perhaps the fundamental issue of a lot of our work at Carb and as board members for the rest of our time we're going to serve here, however long it might be, which is trying to make sure that this transition away from fossil fuels and towards a greener infrastructure, works, and that our state can be an example of doing it right. And it's going to take single-minded focus and coordination from CEC, PUC, Carb, to make sure that our grid and our infrastructure can handle what our regulations are telling the equipment manufacturers and the fleets to do. So I think it's great we have Annalisa Bevan, our new infrastructure czar at Carb, and obviously she's working with all of the other agencies. The person who came on from PGE, please come to our board meeting when we pass and consider possibly the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule later this year. We're going to need folks from the IOUs and DWP, Edison, PGE to come and talk about how you're going to help through the Charge Ready and other programs to make this work. We need your participation and need to have confidence that together we can do this. That's the macro. For infrastructure, though, we're here to talk about Moyer. Moyer's got about $250 million a year, and that I think is for on-road, and off-road. So just a piece of it really is what we're talking about here. So Dr. Katzenstein, I know you've been instrumental in helping the South Coast get the money out the door from Moyer. How do you think Moyer should intersect with the infrastructure piece? Obviously, we can fund infrastructure through Moyer. But given it's quite expensive and given your past experience, what role do you see Moyer, which is our charge here today, with the small jurisdiction, addressing the infrastructure piece? If you can speak to that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I sure leave my video off. My internet's a little choppy, but appreciate that, Gideon. I think the one thing with Moyer, we have the new updates and really appreciate Carb's updates to Chapter 4. I think the incentives are there for the zero emission trucks. And as you're seeing tonight, the question is on the infrastructure. So if we do get a taker, we just opened Moyer this past Tuesday for the 30 million for on-road trucks. And it's going to be interesting if we do get takers for zero emission trucks, how they're going to charge those trucks. And I think that's where, the ARB programs and the CEC program may come together, and ensuring that if you do incentivize a truck, there's a charger for that truck. And I like to think that probably as we go through this new transition with these new Chapter 4 incentive funds, that it's likely we're going to see medium duty take on these incentives first, and then move into heavy duty. But we'll have to see how that plays out. But our experience with the pilot programs is the infrastructure takes at least 6 months to get into place. And so it's no easy feat especially for the heavy duty trucks to get this infrastructure in place. And so with the Moyer program, if you do go with a heavy duty truck, you need the infrastructure. What's going to happen if the vehicle shows up first before the charger does? And now you're required to scrap, your older vehicle. So I think that's another consideration that needs to be looked at. Hopefully, I addressed your comments there, Gideon. I'm not sure I covered all that, though.
I should have given you a better heads up with the question I was going to be asking, but I kind of let the discussion go where it is. Do you think that the air districts are going to be able to partner with the CEC and the PUC and the other agencies to sort of use Moyer with these other funds to put together packages? Or are you going to be relying on the grant writers and the contractors to sort of put that together and present it to the district?
Yeah, I think that's a piece that's really needed, is to bring in the other agencies that are more focused on infrastructure and kind of marry these incentive programs together. Because that's what's going to be needed, especially for the small fleets. They're really going to take a risk on going into these new technologies. And one of the things we're doing with the 617 communities is a lot of them have pushed for zero emission trucks in their communities, especially for the small fleets. So we're setting up a loaner program. We're just starting to draft this right now, where they can try out the trucks and become educated on how zero emission trucks operate before they go and take the jump into purchasing a truck through an incentive program.
Well, that's really exciting. And when are you going to get that off the ground, Aaron?
Well, we just submitted our truck project plan to Carb last Friday, and we'll be receiving comments from them in probably the next 2 months here. And then what we're going to do meantime is start to develop the RFP with the communities on how this loaner program is going to work, like how long you can borrow the truck for, what the insurance requirements are, and there'll definitely be the education component for it.
That's a very good, that's very exciting. That was on my wish list. So I'm excited to hear that somebody else is actually thinking about and putting that together. So thank you for that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have it in place in the next 6 to 8 months, but we'll see.
Great. So Annalisa, one of the things that, I just didn't hear a lot about, and it truly was our EJPs and our communities, and not only the concerns of infrastructure, but also not being left behind in infrastructure. I mean, it's a double-sided coin, right? And I know we have Kevin Hamilton on the line as well, and we do need to move on. But if we have time, and Kevin, you're still with us, I'd really like to hear some of your thoughts about what we should be addressing for our vulnerable communities. And Annalisa, I understand that the Carb board is going to get a briefing in April on infrastructure. I think it would be extremely valuable to do less time on some of the setup that we already know and more time on how we're going to coordinate, what these efforts look like, some of the challenges that maybe we don't have answers to, but how you're approaching it. I think is what I'm hearing, not only over our chat, but also in our discussions here. Okay, with that, why don't we go ahead and we're moving on to our next area, which is small. Oh yes, Annalisa, thank you.
Do you want to hear from Kevin? I see he's on camera.
Oh,
I'm here. If you want to give me a minute there, Sandy, I'll take it.
I really would appreciate that. I didn't want to put you exactly on the spot right away, but I appreciate you're up for the challenge.
A little late for that, but always up for the challenge, as you know. So I put in some comments along the way.
I did see them.
And I think the most critical piece, and I always reference this through both my family, Brother Darrow, who drove a truck and was part of a small company, and then my neighbor across the street, who's a single owner operator and parks his truck in his driveway every night. And I talk to him a lot, and my goal is to see him thriving. And right now he doesn't see a way forward for this that he can afford. He just doesn't see it. He recently got a 2017 Volvo truck, which I'm happy to see because it's, updated beyond 2010. And, his concerns and the concerns of others that I've spoken to in the community about this, small owner operators, 2-3 trucks, one with 10, just feel like they're not part of this at all, that they they're just trying to make a living, and it's a very tight group of folks. And so how do we reach them? Well, I think the top-down approach of having, you know, somebody run it who's contracted by the agency, and then they hire somebody down lower to open up an area, and then they contract with who they think is going to be a big winner for them. And then, you know, that's how it goes. But we really have to identify key people who live in these communities, where a lot of these folks live, and especially the culture of the business for that community. In the Valley here, especially in my area, we have a lot of folks from the Sikh community who are in the industry, and then a lot of folks who've come up here and made their lives here from Mexico and Central America, who again have built their own businesses and operate these smaller trucking concerns. I would say a major problem for them is, where do I fuel my truck when it's all electric? I have no idea where I would even plug the thing in. So that's a major piece right there. And then who's going to fix my truck when it breaks down? Now, I like to tell them that, you know, electric trucks are going to break down a lot fewer times and require a lot less maintenance than that diesel pusher you're running around in now. But, you know, that's nice for me to say, but they don't see anything, again, especially in our region, that makes them feel a little bit more secure about that. And as I mentioned in the chat with regard to hydrogen, and I sit on that committee at CEC, by the way, and when I look at a plan for hydrogen infrastructure for the next 2 to 3 years, and I see nothing in the San Joaquin Valley, huge gaps, not just here, but other parts of California. So basically, we're building a program for the ports, but yet, you know, a large chunk of California trucking and the small fleets are not necessarily located in or directly servicing the ports. So the pollution in those communities will not change, simply because, and I am not arguing or even trying to minimize the problem the ports face, just saying that all the money and all the solutions can't be focused right there at this point. We've got to spread that out and create that cultural change, that movement across the state, where everybody who is part of this sees, oh yeah, well, they got a bank of those DC fast chargers in downtown Huron. There's at least 3 owner operator groups there, you know, with 1 to 3, 4 trucks. Knowing that they could park there and charge for about 5 or 6 hours at night would make a big difference for them. But they don't know where they could do that now. They don't see how they ever would be able to. So no, thank you. I'll continue to, you know, use that diesel pump at the downtown gas station. So until we make that move so that people can publicly see the places that they can securely support their business from, how can we expect them to simply get a different truck? So
there's no question about that, Kevin. And
so that's it. That's my rant.
So, but what's been very helpful is, I think you bring up the key issues on timing and also education and outreach. And you teed up beautifully our next conversation.
Right.
Which truly is this.
Always happy to help.
Yeah, thanks. I really always appreciate
Even blindly.
call on you. And with that, I'm going to have Board Member Krakow kick us off on the small fleets.
Yeah, well, this certainly is a priority topic here. I want to thank again Vice Chair Berg for being our great MC today, and Master of Ceremonies, and for Mayor Hurt for integrating the environmental justice issues through our main 2 topics. The first one we just covered, which is infrastructure, and now we're going to go into small fleets. Have been monitoring the chat, so let's just get this out in the open. And I think there was a little bit of miscommunication before about the truck and bus turnover at the end of this year. So I'm going to call on staff again to sort of clarify that. My understanding is that there are tens of thousands of trucks that still have to turn over this year. These are the pre-2010 model years. We're doing a lot to communicate those requirements. We also have a manufacturer delay provision. This does relate, of course, to the small truckers, but just to be clear, can we turn it over to staff for a second, because this will set the stage for a small fleet discussion for the end of this year, certainly, but again, for other transitions to come. What is the truck and bus requirement by the end of the year? And what are we doing at Carb to make sure that industry is aware of it? I see the comments from Bill Abudi, Jose Mondojano, and Russell Gabbard in the chat. So let's just get to the bottom of that real quick, and then we'll move on to the remainder of the slides.
Sure, this is Craig Siegel. Let me begin and staff may follow up. So the truck and bus regulation has been in force for going on a decade now. It's one of Carb's most important efforts to clean up dirty diesel trucks. And it has been, I think this is really important to emphasize, board member, really successful. At this point, as far as we know, over almost 1.6 million vehicles have been upgraded. That's more than 85% of the fleet. We are, of course, have numbers change every day, but I think they're on the order of perhaps 36,000 California registered vehicles still facing the deadline. And there are extensive outreach that's been going on all through this time. Carb has sent out mail outs to, I think, over 200,000 fleets, providing a 2-year notice. We have an ongoing operating hotline. We have awarded about $500 million in purchase incentives to purchase over 10,000 vehicles. And we've continued to update fleets as they go. As things stand, of course, we are getting closer to the deadline, and there are important tools available to folks. And I know we've provided this to the trucking industry directly, as well as individual fleets, including manufacturer delay extensions, allowing folks who have made plans to purchase a vehicle to continue operating existing vehicles past the deadline, assuming they place a new vehicle order by September. Staff may want to fill in beyond that, but what I want to emphasize is really 2 points. One, that this has been a really major success, perhaps one of the most important things we've ever done. And 2, it has been a collaborative success. Some of the themes we've already heard in this meeting are about how do we coordinate incentives, infrastructure, fleets, how are we conscious about EJ needs? And we know that as we approach the next round of our work in the transition to zero emission vehicles, there are a lot of lessons we can learn from what is frankly a really challenging program. This sort of scrap and replace rule has lessons for us, teaches us how we might approach things differently, more creatively, more flexibly in the future, using a range of tools from indirect source rules to differentiated registration fees to more direct approaches. But what the other thing it teaches us is that when we work together, we can make a lot of progress and have. So is there still a compliance challenge for some fleets? Absolutely, don't want to sugarcoat that. But have millions of vehicles been replaced? Yes. And are there tools, including this manufacturer's delay tool, that can help along with continued funding? Also, yes. And defer to anyone on technical staff who wants to provide any further details, but just wanted to provide that overview.
Yeah, thank you for that, Craig. I'll add in just a little bit. It's definitely aligning with what you're saying, and with regard to the challenges of turning over fleets and 0709 vehicles they need to turn over by the end of this year. Trucker staff did recognize that the delays that have been caused just due to availability, and so the manufacturer delay extension that we provided a link in the chat. Please, go ahead and take a look at that. Just a couple of points I'll make towards that. As Craig mentioned, we do need to have a purchase agreement in place by September 1st. So please please move quickly on that. We know that those deadlines come up quick. So we want to get everybody eligible as can be. You must be reported in the truckers database as compliant. So please work with truckers staff to ensure that you are compliant and would remain eligible for that extension. I'll put the email for the truckers hotline in the chat as well, so folks can get into direct contact with them if you need be. And I know there was a question regarding eligibility regarding Moyer funding, and we are aligning with the manufacturer delay extension. So vehicles and fleets that are eligible for that extension will also remain eligible for Moyer funding as well. So we do intend to assist that transition as well as best we can, but I wanted to make sure that folks are aware of those criteria that are in place for that Moyer manufacturer delay extension, and can and again, please go ahead and take a look at that link, and you can take a look for yourself and see what some of the other aspects of it are as well. And again, I'll put the contact email for the trucker staff in the chat as well.
Great. So I really appreciate that. And I thought it was really important to set that stage. Some of the folks from the trucking industry that are working on this, I know. Matt Schrapp from the Harbor Trucking Association. But, I don't know you, Mr. Abudi, Mr. Goldberg, Mr. Mandrapano, Joe Rakovic, I know has written some letters from Western Truckers, who is down on the South Coast. I invite you folks to personally outreach to me to talk about the small fleet issues, to talk about the truck and bus transition. This truly is something we need to do, all hands on deck, to have responsibility for as board members. There's been a long time to meet this transition, and we are not going to reach attainment in the South Coast or help our EJ communities like we should until we get these diesel trucks off the road. But that being said, we have to do this effectively with a proper degree of outreach, and we have to put all the tools on the table to help the trucking industry not only meet this transition, but the ones that are going to come as we try to get to zero emissions. And I've got this slide up here, slide 41, slide 40. It's my slide. I think we pretty much already covered it between my soapboxing here and then the things that Craig and Femi had to say about the small fleet issues. But the fundamental challenge is, how do we better serve the small fleet owners? How do we address these serious infrastructure cost issues that relate to the small fleets, especially those that we're trying to somehow get to take the early adopter leap here? And again, there's an equity piece to this too. There's a social equity piece, a social justice piece, that our programs have to work for residents of our state, large and small. And so the way that I think we all see it as board members is that the small fleet issue, also is an environmental justice issue. So it's one of our top two issues today. We already covered infrastructure. Now we're going to move into small fleets. We've got 3 or 4 slides on that, and then a bunch of questions as well, and time for questions. So I'll turn it over now to Sandra Nguyen, who is going to cover the remaining slides on the small fleet before we open it up to questions and discussion.
Yes, thank you, Board Member Krakoff. Recognizing that smaller fleets do not have the same resources as larger fleets, the Moyer program provides flexibilities exclusively for zero-emission vehicles. As the need continues to enhance support for zero-emission technology for small fleets in the Moyer program, we are looking at a range of Moyer tools. This year's IPAG is looking at a range of Moyer tools. And we have acknowledged VIP as one of those tools, offering exclusive funding opportunities for small fleets with 10 vehicles or less to transition to cleaner technology. In addition, funding percentages remain in place to support small fleets, receiving up to 80% of the total vehicle costs. For example, a Class 8 truck, $410,000, that's up to $410,000. In addition, through the CAP incentive program, small fleets can receive up to 90 to 95% of the total vehicle cost with no funding cap. Another example is the HVIP program that provides up to $120,000 for a Class 8 truck, with additional funding up to $138,000 for small fleets or disadvantaged communities. So let's take a closer look at the status of small fleets. What does the current landscape look like? Starting off the discussion, what is the definition of small fleets? For the Moyer program, that's 10 trucks or less. Currently within truckers, 84% of fleets are reported as 10 vehicles or less. Of that, over 1,200 fleets have been reported as 2007 and 2009 engine model year. As of July 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2020, over 900 vehicles in total were reported in Carl. Of that, a third are zero-emission engines. Almost 20% of them are zero-emission engines funded for small fleets, and 15% of these vehicles are also in environmental justice areas. Looking at the current landscape, majority of small fleets funded have been in environmental justice areas, but we can see not a lot of small fleets have been funded overall. We acknowledge the need to enhance support for zero-emission technology as regulations sunset and this technology becomes commercialized, and recognize this need to gather feedback through a public process to help ensure the ease of that VIP process extends to zero emission technology adoption for small fleets. And with that, we'll open it to our Q&A portion. Feel free to raise your hand and we can answer any questions. Please state your name and affiliation so that we can better address your question.
Hi, Sandra, we have Matthew Leduc first up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Actually, this very last bullet was going to be my big question, which is, I was thinking about what Kevin was saying about the independent operators, right? And that, the vast majority of the drayage trucks, again, we're for mobility, we're focused only on creating a solution for drayage. My guess is that HVIP, we did some research and we saw that about 6% of HVIP vouchers have been accessed by small fleets. And to our knowledge, not a single independent operator has also accessed HVIP. I'm curious if an independent operator has accessed Carl Moyer. I guess, I thought a lot about what Kevin was saying earlier, and that even if an independent operator did plug their truck in at home, I mean, one of the great things about incentives in California is LCFS, but it's not an easy incentive to monetize. You have to, as everybody knows. And so I think the big question I have is, have we thought about how many independent operators are accessing these incentives, one, and two, when we look at what will happen to supply chain in the coming year and the attrition from the registry, there's going to be a big gap there, right? There's going to be thousands of trucks that cannot access the port, and I don't know where they can go. And I don't think that they have accessed any of these incentives to my knowledge. There may be maybe one or two. I've seen some small, but I'm curious if any independent operators have. Thanks.
Yeah, Peter, I see your hand was raised. Did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, thanks for the chance to jump in. I wanted to provide a little bit of context for what we're seeing in HVIP. And this is some of the more recent data that we're seeing from the recent rounds of funding, both in 2021, and then some very preliminary observations on what we saw in the last round of HVIP funding a couple of weeks ago when we opened up for the first time this year. Last year, though, in 2021, very unusual year, we had about $150 million in funding. But we were pleased to see that we had about 40% of the fleets that requested vouchers were small fleets of less than or equal to 50 vehicles. So that we know that we still have a lot more work to do, but it's good to see that we are seeing some participation from the small fleets this year in 2022. Obviously, still very preliminary data, but it looks like the small fleet participation is increasing. So we're starting to see even more participation from small fleets, which is helpful because even with significant funding, we recognize that we can't fund every vehicle out there. But it looks like this shift to providing significant incentives to small fleets and HVIP is starting to produce some real tangible results. So I wanted to share some of that preliminary data that we're seeing in the program.
Mr. Christensen, this is a board member Krakow. Thank you. You probably know as much or more about this than just about anybody on this Zoom call. Can you just, in a nutshell, talk about some of the innovations that were done with HVIP to try to address the small fleets, which I understand we're just now starting to see if that is working. When will we know whether some of these innovations that you're about to describe truly are reaching the small fleets? Is that going to be once we see the data for the latest round?
Absolutely. It's going to be based on the data. We're going to be looking at participation over time. And really, I think the commitment to small fleets is something that is going to continue over the next several years. We put improved policies in place this year. We increased our voucher enhancement, in other words, higher funding amount for small fleets, those fleets that have few vehicles and low annual revenue. We increased that voucher enhancement to 15% higher than a standard rebate. And you also, I think, touched earlier on our launching a new innovative small e-fleet project, which really allows us to kind of take a clean slate and look at what does it take to help the most disadvantaged small fleets in the state. So looking at new incentive models, Mr. Leduc mentioned some innovative programs and innovative ideas on how to support small fleets, both in drayage and in other markets, both through approaches to vehicle ownership, all-inclusive leasing. That includes maintenance, includes infrastructure, includes charging, but it even also includes opportunities for non-ownership programs where fleets can use vehicles either in a short or a long-term lease arrangement. So we think that those things are going to help us to support small fleets, and we'll continue to look for ways to improve that over time and keep an eye on the data to see how we're doing.
When we've done set-asides in the past, Mr. Christensen, for a drayage, for example, or let's say we were going to start doing set-asides for small fleets, how have those worked? Have they been fully subscribed, or is it sort of depends on what the set-aside is, or is it too early to know?
Everything of recent vintage has been fully subscribed very, very quickly.
And Peter, this is Sandy. How you doing? Nice to be back on a project with you.
Hi, Sandy.
Hey, so I'm going to take off my Carb hat and I'm going to put on my own small fleet hat, because as many of you know, I do own a company that has 8 trucks, 1 Class 7, 7 Class 8s. And my company, we do have some resources. When I think about the 1 to 3 fleet, which at the time of truck and bus, we were projecting that was about 50% of the fleet. This is going to be a really big issue. I would really like to throw out the idea that on those 1 to 3 or those very, very small fleets, and this is a transition, and this isn't just an upgrade from dirtier diesel to clean diesel, that we should have a serious conversation about funding those small fleets through their compliance period. This is not pay to comply. This is a wholesale transformation, and to be able to fund those small fleets through compliance would be a game changer for those small fleets. And I'm really focusing on that 1 to 3 with some sort of ability, maybe on the rest, to get infrastructure funding through compliance. And so I'm hoping that maybe your team can, after you stop hyperventilating, can really chat about that possibility.
So what you're saying, Sandy, is instead of funding just early adopters before the compliance requirements, that for the smallest fleets that really need the help, we fund them in order to comply with the regulations.
Yeah, up until their compliance date, then we can't fund out of compliance, right? No question. But it's really would be the game changer, because, and if we would also incentivize used secondary market. And I know that we've looked into that as well, but we really have to look at the small fleets, not with the same lens of the medium and large fleets. We need a game changer here, and that could be a possibility.
Sandy, I agree with you. And the only reason that I'm hyperventilating right now is that I don't have the fleet size data on the 1 through 3 in HVIP. But I can tell you that for fleets of less than 10 vehicles, we had about 16-ish percent, 16% in 2021. So smaller than the 50 as you would expect, but still there is some participation there. And I totally agree with all the comments that you just said. I mean, we look at this as an opportunity for us in the HVIP program to help find creative ways to support small fleets, and then use the lessons learned that we're getting right now to help influence the other funding programs that we have in our portfolio. So right on, appreciate the comments, and we're excited to continue working on this.
Great. Well, thank you very much for teeing this up. And then maybe Board Member Krakow, we can move into the other public comments.
Sounds good to me. Ms. Nguyen, or is someone else going to call on some of the folks that are raising their hands? If there's anyone else.
Yes, Cruz will be announcing based on order. So Cruz.
Hi.
Thanks, Cruz.
Yes, thank you. Next is Mark Roast.
Thank you. Yeah, following up on that great talk about the big change. If you go to volume, the volume makes an incredible difference in the cost of a conversion kit. Also, that can also apply to the solar charging and the stationary batteries for that. And we need to really, you guys could jumpstart the conversion kit company in terms of actually producing by giving them an aggregate order for a lot of conversion kits, which they can turn over to the suppliers of the motors and the other parts that can then prioritize them because they're in volume. Because we're looking at 6 months to a year of lead time for some of the key parts for a conversion kit. And the conversion kit's going to cut the cost of converting one of these 1 to 3 truck fleets by 1/2 to 2/3, especially if it's done in some volume. And if we could set up a company that's a partnership between the state and private to do that in an organized way, then that will, I mean, Bill Abudi can start it, but then he's a great leader, a great thought leader for the other truckers. So get some demonstrations going with new technology that we're trying to bring forward. And that is gonna make all the difference. And I can give you more details privately.
Okay. Next we have Beth White. I see your hand is raised. You can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was clicking on and it wasn't working too well. I had some direct chats that I answered. And so certainly if anyone wants any additional links put in, I'm happy to do that. And so since I have overseen the implementation of the truck and bus regulation for a really, really long time, I also have known Matt Schrapp for many, many years and a lot of other stakeholders that have been around for a long time. So I just wanted to say really quickly, especially since this slide is up right now, to qualify the truckers numbers a little bit. So, you're not required to report vehicles that meet the engine model year schedule. Therefore, a fleet could have 20 trucks, 10 of which comply with the engine model year schedule and 10 of which do not. So they're using a flexibility option or their deadline hasn't come up yet, or whatever the case may be. And so those 10 are reported in truckers, but they could be a fleet of 20. We certainly attempted to use the data we have access to at California DMV to try and determine fleet size through that method. And it does have its challenges, and we've done what we can. But Sandy's correct. Certainly at the beginning of the truck and bus regulation, it was about 60% of the fleets were the 1 to 3 size, but about 90% of the trucks were in larger fleets. And we have seen that move a bit over the years to where the percentage of small fleets is a little bit less than that. And certainly during COVID, we saw a bit of a shift. We always see, and certainly OIDA and some other groups have been very familiar with this, it going back and forth and ebb and a flow between owner operators, and then they go work for a company and then they go back into business for themselves. And so there is somewhat of a shift that goes back and forth, but during COVID, we saw a little bit more of a shift from owner operator to going to work for a company. It may come back in upcoming years. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would certainly support some of the other things that were mentioned, like the manufacturer delay. We're certainly been familiar with some chip issues and manufacturing issues. And so we stand behind that provision in the regulation and work with fleets on that. And have certainly over the years sent out a lot of notices, either based on DMV, where we needed to make sure that all vehicles understood that an engine model year was up to bat at the end of the year kind of thing. But also targeted ones for those that have reported options in truckers, where those options, those flexibilities may end or something like that. So I just wanted to make sure that I sort of qualified a few of those things. At the end of the year, you're welcome to either replace the engine or the vehicle. So if repower is an option for you, we have a system, the acronym is EDVR, that you can go and report repowers that you've done to the vehicle so that you can comply with the regulation. I can certainly put that link in the chat. And then I would also add, I noticed that Femi put in the 866 email. If it's a more complex reporting issue, you need help with some more complex situations with your account in truckers, there's a truckers email specific for that. I'll put that in the chat as well. I think that covers anything that sort of jumped out at me as we were going through this, but I'm available if there's any questions that anyone has also. So, thanks.
Thank you, Beth.
And I really appreciate that information, going through the truck and bus rule with you. And there are some great lessons learned, and we'll all look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Sandy.
Okay, we do have Carmen Perez up next. And if you could state your name and affiliation again, that'd be great.
Hello, yes, my name is Carmen Perez. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, one of my main question is, are we gonna, as owner operators, how long is the period gonna be when we purchase new trucks? Because 4 years ago, we purchased a truck and finally we were bringing some revenue, and now we have to purchase a new truck again. So my truck is a 2008. So my thing is to make the decision to purchase a new truck is how long, or is there going to be another change that we have to renew our motor or either purchase another truck?
Yeah, that's a real important question. Can our staff lay the foundation a little bit here about the SB1 useful life? I have some thoughts about this as well, but let's just first get a clear understanding about the truck and bus rule and the 2010 turnover, but how that relates to the SB1 useful life.
I can take that if nobody else is going to jump up for that one.
Please
So
do.
certainly SB, go ahead.
No, just saying, please go on.
Oh, okay, thanks, Craig. So SB1 provided, among many other things, a useful life provision that dealt with the number of miles on the truck, and then certain year parameters as far as when you last had to upgrade the vehicle as required by a Carb regulation. And so I can add that to the chat as well, what those parameters are for useful life. It's pretty straightforward, and I can put that in the chat as well. But the thinking behind that is that we wouldn't ask you to replace a vehicle and then 2 years later replace it again, kind of thing. So so there are some parameters for that, and I'll put that in the chat right now.
But that does not apply to the pre-2010 model years. Those ones, you do have to get those off the road, regardless of how long you may have owned them for. Is that correct?
Right. So SB1 only applied to regulations that came into effect or were amended after 1/1/17. And so the truck and bus regulation, the last time it was amended was in 14. It was never amended after that. So if we opened up the truck and bus regulation, we would have to comply with that requirement, which is not going to happen at this phase, of course. But yes, you are correct. It does apply to certain regulations. And as we have these zero emission regulations come out, obviously, those are after 1/1/17, and they do have to look at the useful life requirement.
So, just to distill that down for the
Sure.
commenter, this is I think a really important and excellent comment. If you have a pre-2010 engine year, you are going to have to turn that over at the end of this year. That is the truck and bus rule. It's been in place for a very long time. The next truck you buy, however, that truck should get its full useful life. Again, it depends. It could be 13 years, could be 18 years, but there is no regulation in place, and there's now a state law that says that you must be allowed to have the full useful life of that engine, which is about 13 or 18 years. So let's say that you go now and you buy a 2015 diesel truck at the end of this year. Theoretically, that truck has 13 or 18 years.
Correct.
And that's the reason why we are going to see still a very significant proliferation of diesel trucks on our roads well into the 2030s, which again is a concern for the air districts and the folks that are breathing in California. So it's a balance that we are trying to strike between fairness and certainty for those folks that operate the trucks and also for the breathers. What we're trying also to do is to put these zero emission rules in place. Currently, we have a fleet rule that's been proposed, hasn't been voted on yet. Right now, that only starts at 50 trucks. If you're below 50 trucks, you don't have to comply with the zero emission regulations. And again, that is just a turnover year by year, starting with some fleets by 10% or starting with new purchases. It's not a requirement to take all existing trucks off the road. So this is probably a little bit of a confusing area, but I think it does highlight that when we're thinking about the small fleets, we have to think about the useful life requirements of SB1 and how those relate to our rules and to the certainty that owners expect, but also understand how our incentive programs maybe can help get folks out of those older trucks, either right when their useful life is over or even before. So I hope we didn't complicate too much the answer to your question. Did that answer the question?
It did, definitely did. Thank you so much. But also the other question I have, the 2008 truck that I have has the carb filter, I think it's called. So it's like a filter that was added onto the truck. So that one's going to be out of compliance as well.
Yes, so if it's subject to the truck and bus regulation and it has an 07 to 09 engine and it's over 14,000 pounds GVWR, then that vehicle it typically would have an OEM particulate matter filter. Some of the 07s didn't, but that would usually be the case. And yes, the deadline is at the end of this year.
Okay. And how could we get a hold of which dealers so we could apply for that incentive? Because I've been trying to look for a list of dealers that are participating, and it's been so hard to find that list.
Have you gone to the zero emission portal that we have on the truck stop webpage?
Yes.
And that didn't help?
No.
Okay, well, we have as quickly as possible been getting that page up and running and updating it. And so I'll take that back to the applicable staff that work on that and let them know that the dealer portion is not user friendly or there at all. I haven't looked at it recently, so I'm not sure. So I'll take a look.
And also, Carmen, could you maybe put your contact information in the chat? And it would be great if we can also point her to the hotlines where she can talk one-on-one with somebody and get the needed information that Carmen needs.
Yeah,
I'll put that in the chat too.
Yes, I tried the hotline and for some reason they don't answer. I leave messages and I don't get no answer back.
Okay, well, that's very important feedback. So let me just ask you, Carmen You raised your hand, so we're going to put you on the hot spot here for a second.
That's okay.
If it's too much, you just
I definitely want these answers.
if it's too much, you just hang up, okay?
No worries.
So you are in the 1 to 3 fleet category.
Yes, we just have one.
So how did you learn about today's workshop?
A truck driver related the information to my husband, and so I look into it and I registered to it. Okay. So that's how I've been trying to. I've been trying everything.
Well, you're exactly the kind of person that I think we as board members need to hear from, and our staff as well when we're talking about this topic about how to reach out to the small fleets.
Yes.
We talked about the hotline. We talked about the website. I'm a little distressed to hear that those weren't helpful to you. What other things can our agency do to reach out to the small fleets? What advice would you give us?
The advice I would give you, definitely, it's either try to connect with the DMV, try to connect with the companies they're getting their loads from. They notify them, like CHP is having a so on inspection. So if you guys would reach out to these companies where the truck drivers are getting their loads and let them know, hey, for your information, you should be aware of, Carb, they're having a meeting, like today, or anything that they need to know that has to be updated. Because this is the only way, fortunately, probably 80 to 70% are able to get this information, because other than that, unfortunately, they're just workers and they just know about getting their loads and coming home, but not about the compliance, especially this one that is so major that it's going to make a big change on many truck drivers. Because like I say, I include myself, we thought we were going to be for a long period of time with the filter that we purchased, that it was going to give us quite a while in being in compliance. And now we get the news that we have to purchase another truck. So I think that would be the best way that you could spread the information, is by trying to get in contact with these fleet companies and DMV. More than anything, I think DMV, they'll be the best way that you could connect, since they're state as well. And when we go there every month to buy our tags, or, some people purchase it yearly, right now with COVID and everything, diesel being so high, we're going every month to get our tags. And so I think that's the place where we get most information. And I think anybody that needs to know anything about trucks or so on, they run to the DMV. So I think the DMV would be a great way to partner up with.
That's a really great suggestion. Thanks for passing that on. I think we all wrote it down and circled it and started. So I'm going to take you out of the hot seat and actually move maybe a Carb staff member into the hot seat for just for a second. I was asked, what is the plan or the schedule to adopt the changes that were approved in Chapter 4 into the VIP program? We know that more changes may be needed, but there's no reason to kind of delay those that have already been done. Are there any responses to the plan or the schedule?
Yeah, thank you, Davina. We mentioned earlier in our presentation that language is live, so it is able for any district to adopt at this point.
So it's been adopted, it's ready to go.
Yes.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Great. And I think our last commenter is Mark.
Thank you. There really is a solution here that solves not only the immediate issue that Carmen has, but also the forthcoming issues. Anybody who buys any kind of diesel truck is basically loading up the air going into the future. So if instead the solution to all of that instead is to convert, to actually support the implement the commercialization of existing commercial conversion kits, and also to support getting some better solar, finishing development of some better solar. This is 2 small companies, and get this started, get this out into the market for the company for the 6 months or 8 months we have left. It may mean actually using the existing solar and the existing stationary batteries, but the short routes, the drayage trucks drive short routes. They can be supported with a lithium battery. So if you just get the conversions going, then they have a 1 million mile lifetime on the motors now, and that solves that. That means that they're going to have that truck that old truck is going to have a new motor that'll be good for the next 20 years or more.
Okay, well, thank you for that input. Do we have another question, Savina?
No, I was just looking in the chat, and it was to FIP Femi about Chapter 4 language can also be applied to FIP immediately. And I guess others still have question marks, so maybe.
Yeah, sorry, let me chime in again. I wasn't aware if your question was specific to VIP.
Yes.
The VIP program would require a public process similar to this, as well as with a 45-day notice. So we were hoping to conclude this particular process with hopefully changes to VIP guideline language that would be applicable as similar to Chapter 4. So that we want to continue that process and work with the districts on how to best create that language that makes VIP continue to be successful and applicable for districts that want to participate.
And is that something this current year, or you're looking at 2023 horizon?
So it would be applicable to 2023, but we hope to get those changes done by the end of this year.
Thank you.
And that's part of what we're doing here today, right?
Right.
And that is a great segue then to our goals for this program. And so if the slide is up. It is really crucial that stakeholders like we have on the phone today, at this meeting today, that we come together and truly discuss these issues that we have been putting on the table with the goal of building consensus and producing a advisory group memo, if you will, to the Carb board outlining our work. And we have done that in the past, but not at this large of a transition. So this could be very exciting to be able to get these, not only these ideas, but understanding the barriers more clearly and addressing those things that we can immediately. And then quite frankly, creating that list of issues that are going to go forward, and hopefully maybe the continuation of a group like this that is constantly looking at new ideas, best practices, and how to reach people. And so I find that very exciting and also very challenging. The second goal truly is to accelerate equitable access, both in vehicles and infrastructure, and to truly operationalize it as a model in this process. It is not a standalone issue. It needs to be addressed in everything we consider. And so next slide. So how are we going to do this? This was our kickoff meeting, and it was designed to be an overview and to start the process. We're looking at having this board memo, if you will, from this group by November, with final drafts. It will probably spill into 23. Given this timeline for VIP, maybe early first quarter of 2023. There's another real opportunity here, and that is the reauthorization of AB 8, which also includes Moyer. And Assembly Member Garcia is one of the lead authors that is looking at how to reauthorize AB8.
It's on our board.
And he is on our board. And he specifically asked, what is working and what doesn't? And what should we be considering for reauthorization on legislative guardrails? What I would like to just a little bit tweak in this is that Moyer has been an extremely successful program for upgrading diesel engines. We need to move past that and into the zero emission arena. What do we need to do to Moyer to be able to make that leap that we're asking our fleets to do for zero emission? That's a real opportunity here, and to be able to produce a list that we could pass on to Assembly Member Garcia, I think would be a really great accomplishment as well. So looking at our timeline, if we could then go to our last slide. We are looking from July to August to have additional workshops. These workshops will be very focused so that the discussions will be able to be in depth, and that as we do discuss and do come to consensus, we can start building that memo. Femi, help me on this 45-day notice.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Berg. The 45-day notice is something that we require in the Moyer program in order to make changes to the guideline language. So we're building that into this process, allowing folks to take a look at the language for 45 days of notice, and then having the meeting afterwards. So you see we have the final meeting in November following that 45-day notice. And with that, we would be able to make any suggested guideline changes as part of this process and move forward with providing, greater opportunities, particularly through VIP, if that's the way that this discussion decides to go. But just building that into our process so we can make guideline changes as needed.
And of course, Vice Chair, depending on where we are, that will go out before or after, as we just sort of drive to consensus.
Great, thank you, Craig.
Vice Chair Berg, what is your vision for these June and August meetings?
So I would really like to see very focused discussions. So we will take the conversations that we have today, and the three of us will review with staff to make them topical, and also make them encourage them to really look at where can we be more effective. And so really focusing on small fleets. And that would include infrastructure, of course, but, and we need, I don't know how many meetings we need, but I do know from the discussion today, if we keep it too broad, we're not going to drill down and be able to come up with some consensus ideas. And so that's, does that ring effective to you?
Yeah, and I don't know, yes, it does. I don't know what, our situation is going to be with COVID, at that point in time, either whether we can get back to in-person meetings, maybe find some way to, get down and get with the small fleets and have them come with us and get some of the dealers or locations. So I think we should think about not just the substance of the meeting, but the format of the meeting in creative ways to get the folks like Carmen, Ms. Perez, and others to be engaged.
I absolutely agree.
I agree, in different parts of the state. So right now we're in Burbank, and then we'll take it up north,
right,
and find different locations so we can continue to spread the news about what we're doing.
Absolutely. And so looking at our time, we have covered so much material today, have gotten great feedback. We have been very blessed with having our own scribe here in the room that has filled up a couple of poster sheets for us. as to what she has been recording for us. Our staff will now go back and review all of the chats. And of course, this has been recorded for us to go back and look at. I think the timing between now and May is crucial for us to keep the momentum going. So staff, I'm really going to challenge, and I think my fellow board members agree, that we need to keep the momentum going. And so however we can help you to get to that next step, to get dates on calendars, because we know between June and August is vacations. And we do want to keep this momentum going. And so very, very exciting. Let's do a lightning round of closing thoughts. I'll start with you, Gideon.
I don't have much more to add. I think that was a very good summary of the thing. Moyer is just a piece of these billions of dollars of incentive programs. Our direct jurisdiction is to figure out, Moyer, for the future, what's needed after these recent amendments, especially with regard to the VIP program. But I think we have to think about, in order to do that, we have to understand what's working in the other incentive programs, what's not, how it relates to the infrastructure question, and how we package this all together. Always want to encourage participation from our air districts, Bay Area and South Coast, Valley Air and the others. You folks are the ones that are getting this money out the door. So we need to hear from you as to what works. But fundamentally, very excited to kick this off. I want to thank our staff and Chair Randolph for giving us a little bit of a role here as board members in doing this. And thank you, Vice Chair, and you, Mayor Hurt, as well. Mayor Hurt?
Well, right before I go to Ms. Hurt, Craig Siegel, I'm putting you on notice that I'm going to call on you after Davina.
So I think for me, just prioritizing our limited resources and just maximizing the zero emission adoption is so important. And we have an opportunity to do that today, and just expanding communications to our small independent fleet operators. It's going to be so important. Coordination of everything we've heard today, the list is long, synthesizing that and making sure that air districts have the tools they need to implement and streamline so we can get folks in zero emission trucks. And so I'm excited we're at this point and what the future looks like.
And certainly sooner than later, because our communities, and especially our EJ communities, desperately need it.
They desperately need it, and we're in a place where we can give it to them. So let's do it.
That's great. Craig.
Sure. So what I thought was fascinating about today was its breadth. We heard from everyone, from truckers working with staff to comply directly, which was stellar, and thanks so much to Board Member Krakow for such a great summary, to ideas for new technologies, new financing approaches, ideas for potential changes in law or programs. There's a huge range here, which was so useful. And on behalf of the staff, we absolutely accept the challenge to keep this momentum moving. We'll be coming back to you all as soon as we can with some ideas, both on meeting formats and tools to continue eliciting the great advice and ideas we're getting here, and ideas that we want to test out with all of you to help improve the program. Something that Vice Chair Berg said at the beginning about how we want to think beyond the possible really resonates with me. This is a program that has served really well, but it's also a program that now is really near the cusp of this step change in technology, and these huge opportunities needs to serve, and it needs to serve small fleets and environmental justice needs particularly well. So I think what I want to see today is the challenge to think broadly here is one that we're excited about, and there's a lot of room to be creative. So thanks for all of this, and more soon.
Thank you, Craig. So I really would like to have everybody take a look at that second bullet point. We have a specific email. I'm sorry, go to the final slide, the contact slide. We have a very specific email for this group, IPAG 2022@arb.ca.gov. And so that's our own email. Please, as you're thinking about these issues, these concerns, drop us a line. We're going to be doing a lot of work over the next 30 days, and we really would appreciate hearing your thoughts. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for being with us. We took the full 3 hours. It was a stimulating, full content meeting, and we can't wait to follow up with everybody. Have a wonderful evening, stay safe, and we'll look forward to getting back together again in June.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye.